want to make a comment, though, about this word truth, and you're going to help us sort of unwrap it here today. But truth today doesn't even feel like it means what it used to mean when, say, I was growing up. It feels like truth now is somehow malleable, somehow contextual in so many ways. And when I was growing up, it was a truth or it was a lie. There were no two ways about it. And so I want us to dig into this, because we have so many people out there who are talking about, relative truths and really almost trying to, not almost, they're trying to rewrite history in many, many ways. And so let's look at it. What is a biblical definition of that word truth, if we go right back to the original Hebrew language?
Well, Jeff, your childhood definition of truth sounds very sensible. And we as Christians, even if this definition of truth is changing in our culture, we need to keep that definition. Either something is true, either something lines up with reality, or it doesn't. And you're right, there's a disease in our culture. It's a widespread postmodern worldview which denies reality or the necessity of absolute truth. And in the name of this open-mindedness or political correctness or being non-judgmental, this permissive, you do you, I'll do me, your truth, my truth attitude, sadly is the norm in the West. And it allows each person to mold their version of reality and morality. And I think that this way of thinking, it's so ingrained in our current culture that it's just too easy to go along with it unwittingly or unknowingly. Christians can feel awkward about sharing the dogmas of the faith in a culture where relativity is king and society is shouting, why can't a person just believe whatever they want to? But really, this question of truth, it's age old. Even as Jesus stood in trial before Pilate, we have this exchange recorded in John chapter 18, where Pilate said, "You are a king then?" And Jesus answered, "You say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." And Pilate retorted, "What is truth?" And really, I think Pilate's question remains so profound. Each person in every generation must seek to answer it.
Absolutely. And so, Melissa, if we look at the original language, I know you just read from the New Testament. Original language would be Greek there, but uncover this for us a little bit. I mean, truth seems simple, as I mentioned before. When I was young, it seemed very simple. It's either a truth or a lie. It's one or the other. But help us to get a little broader picture of what that word truth means in the original language.
Yeah, so the Hebrew word for truth is emet, and it's spelled with an aleph, a mem, and a tav. And the rabbis say that it's not on accident that the word for truth is the very first letter in the Hebrew alphabet, the very middle letter, and the very last letter, because they say, the truth should be the beginning of a matter, the middle of a matter, and the end of it. It should be the whole truth and nothing but the truth. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, as they say in a court of law, I believe. And this word, emet, it means firmness, faithfulness, truth, a lasting truth, something that's right. And in Hebrew, truth and faith spring from the same family of words. And I think that's a great example of something we can miss in our English translation of the Bible, is that we think of truth and faith as two separate ideas. But these two words are intertwined in a way that we completely miss in English. Almost all the words in the Hebrew language, they're categorized into families of words according to topic. And all the words in a certain family share 3 or sometimes 4 consonants in common. And from the same family of words where we get the word emet, we get the word emunah, which means usually translated as faith, but sometimes this word is even translated as truth as well. It can mean faith, support, agreement, firm regulation. And we're going to actually talk more about this word specifically later, I believe. But when we come back to this word truth, we find it's related to the verb aman, has the same root letters again. And that verb means to trust, to be faithful and trustworthy, to be true. And the etymology of emet expresses the necessity for faith to be rooted in truth. Either a thing is true or it's not, as you very sensibly understood as a child. We must identify and believe truths. We must reject lies. It's imperative that we are teaching this to the next generation.
We're dealing with this question today of, is Zionism racism? And this term is something that I just find completely mind-boggling. This idea that somehow if you're a Zionist, you're a racist. I've been to Israel. None of this adds up for me. So talk to us a little bit about where and why did this kind of idea originate, and what was the motivation behind creating this false claim?
So I think that when people say this, they don't realize that they're actually parroting Soviet propaganda from the 1970s. It was actually the Soviets who coined this term. So they coined it out of a sense of frustration with their failure to undermine the still very nascent and fragile state of Israel. Israel at that point had successfully repelled a coordinated attack of 5 Arab armies that were allied with Russia. That was first in 1967 and then again in 1973. So I want to jog through some of the milestones of the 20th century in order for this to make sense. So we should remember that Europe spends the better part of the 1930s and 40s purging itself of its Jewish population. And then the Middle East and North Africa, they spend the better part of the 1950s and the 1960s doing exactly the same thing. So many people may not know, but Baghdad in Iraq actually used to be about 30 to 40% Jewish. So that's an even higher than the current Jewish population of New York. So Baghdad, for all intents and purposes, was a Jewish city. But in 1941, as the Nazis were prosecuting their war of annihilation of the Jews in Europe, there was the Farhud, which was a pogrom against the Jews of Iraq in 1941. And so it had a devastating effect on the Jewish community of Baghdad. So by the time you get to 1951, the Jews of Iraq have been totally driven out through pogroms, discrimination, and threats of violence. And the same thing has happened in Iran, in Yemen, in Morocco, Algeria, Syria, Lebanon. The entire Muslim world becomes Judenrein, which means free of the Jews. And so the Soviets are gaining influence in the Muslim world because it was yet another front in the Cold War. In the battle between the Soviets and the United States, the war wasn't actually fought. It wasn't a hot war. It was a cold one. And so it was fought through proxy battles in other countries. So part of this proxy battle was the distribution of Arabic translations of the protocols of the Elders of Zion across the Arab world. So the protocols are a fake Russian document that pretends to be written by Jewish leaders, and it explains the so-called Jewish conspiracy to control the world secretly. So this is the political backdrop of the Soviet campaign to delegitimize the young state of Israel. And it really all comes to a head in 1975 when the Soviets orchestrate this resolution in the United Nations General Assembly. And this resolution enshrines the term Zionism is racism. And unfortunately, this resolution wasn't retracted until 1991. So it really succeeded in poisoning the atmosphere for generations. I want to be clear here that not only is Zionism not racism, but anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. What is Zionism fundamentally is the belief that the Jewish people don't have to live forever at the sufferance of others. It's a realization that anywhere we've ever lived outside of the land of our ancestors has not been safe to us. Every single place we've ever lived has eventually grown tired of us and has purged us. And so as a result of this, we must have a land of our own if we're going to survive. Zionism also was not invented in the late 1800s by Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl obviously, succeeded in popularizing the concept and drawing support for the idea. But the Zionist dream is the phrase, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, which we say every single time we celebrate Passover. I mean, the desire and the dream to return to Israel is not a product of colonialism or racism or whiteness. It's just literally the dream that we should live at peace in a land of our own. So anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, it's an ideological virus that's infected the entire world at this point.
Let's talk about this. First of all, does this claim that South Africa is making have any validity whatsoever, in your opinion?
Well, it's completely bizarre, actually, Jeff, when you think about it, that Israel, from its perspective, and this is all about framing and narratives, actually. But in Israel's, deep experience, we're talking about a people, the Jewish people, who've been subject to genocide for millennia, haven't they? We read it in the Bible, and we know of 2,000 years of church and Islamic history where the Jews have been subject to persecution and intended annihilation from time to time, leading most intensively to the Holocaust, the Shoah of the Second World War. And after the Holocaust, the international community, I think the Holocaust is a watershed in many ways in world history, but from a legal perspective, it definitely was. And we created a new legal system, the United Nations system, and all of the surrounding institutions around that. And one of them is the Genocide Convention, 1948, same year that Israel was created. And this was a very, very Jewish initiative. Raphael Lemkin was a Polish Jew who escaped Europe during the Second World War, made his way to America, and sounded the alarm bell and had the presence of mind to say, we need a legal structure which is going to make sure this never happens again. And he was the champion of the genocide. The whole idea of genocide was a new one. It was his invention. And genocide means to kill a people, of course.
Yes.
So that's what this convention is all about. And now we have the bizarre situation that we have a country like South Africa, which is not particularly well known for its human rights record, claiming that Israel, the Jewish people, are committing genocide. And to my mind, this is it's a complete misuse of the legal system. The idea that Israel, since the 7th of October, and this is the claim, actually their claim is that ever since 1948, Israel has been intentionally trying to eliminate the Palestinians. And everything since the 7th of October proves the demonic hatred of the Jewish people towards the Palestinians. And the killing in Gaza is further evidence of this intention to annihilate. So this is a complete, in my view, complete inversion, not only of history, but of the legal system.
Sudan was Africa's biggest country. In the north, it was Arab Muslims. And when the British left in 1956, they gave the country to them. In the south were Black African Christians, and they got nothing. And they got to be dominated by the Islamists. And there were several wars because they wanted to impose jihad. By jihad, they wanted to impose Islam on the Christians in the south. They killed 2 million people and during the First War. And Christians call this the hidden Holocaust because nobody really intervened or cared or knew about it. And that's a key point that I want to keep making, is that people who call themselves human rights activists, at least in these big established groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, they're there because they're decent white people who want to say, I'm not a bad white guy, I'm not a bad white guy, so I'm going to signal my virtue by pointing to all the bad things that white people do. And that's going to, for me, that solves the psychological problem of white guilt, of I'm not bad and all that. But when they see evil done by non-whites, this is a problem for them because it's not their program. That's not what they joined it for, or especially when they see evil done by Muslims, and you're not supposed to say, because they're a protected class in America, you're not supposed to say anything critical about anything Muslims have done, or even Muslim societies have done, or even radical Muslims have done. So it's mum's the word. And so that sacrifices the victims of jihad. And I was annoyed at that because I got to know the Africans. I joined up with a Christian group who are the heroes of the story, Christian Solidarity International, led by an incredible saint of a guy who's too humble. If he gets mad at me when I say that. His name is John Eibner. And we figured out a way to buy back the slaves. We would pay off Arab retrievers with money collected from America and from Europe to go back up north and take these slaves that had been taken from the raids in the South and bring them back. So the raids. October 7th happened now, and I knew what had happened exactly in Israel because I'd seen it in Sudan. I'd seen it 20 years ago in Sudan. I talked to survivors. These are Black Christian girls, mostly women, because the men were all killed. And what happened on October 7th to my people had happened to Black Christians in Sudan, exactly the same. Militias would, screaming Allah Akbar, storm into villages, shoot the men, capture and rape and burn people in front of each other, and torture. And I mean, I can tell you conversations I've had with through Dinka translators with the girls in Sudan. It's just like what happened to the Jews. And they would take them captive, and they would make them slaves, and they'd be sex slaves and concubines and all of that. So I knew when October 7th happened that this had happened before.
The entire world horrified by the beheadings, burning people alive, the rape, the murder. Everybody in the world who's got any decency is horrified by this. Palestinian Authority sees this now as an opportunity to unify with Hamas. Now, it's crazy. The United States and all these Western countries are funding the PA. Why don't they realize that if the PA sees this as an opportunity to unify with Hamas, there's something wrong with the PA as well. Let me say something else about what's going on. There were two terrible things that happened on October 7th. One was what Hamas did. And the other thing was the Palestinian Authority response. The Palestinian Authority embraced this. On Palestinian TV the next morning, we heard a Fatah leader say, "We woke up to a morning of joy, a morning of happiness, a morning of pride." Massacring and raping Israelis was a morning of pride. And this continued. This was the attitude that continued in the Palestinian Authority. And then what happened was we saw polls a month and then 2 months later that were just absolutely shocking. A poll that came out about a month and a half later, when everybody knew the atrocities, everybody knew what happened, 75% of Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza supported what happened. It was actually higher in the West Bank. 82% supported the attack that happened. And then they were asked, did these recent events give you pride as a Palestinian? And this even shocked me, and I know the Palestinians inside out. 98% said it gave them pride as Palestinians. So you're talking about not an overwhelming majority, you're talking about everyone. The entire Palestinian population was proud that they went and they did this horrific massacre. Now, how could that be? I'll tell you how. First of all, I described to you before how they convinced Palestinians that to fight Jews is to service humanity. But there's a second component as well that's probably even more important, and that's the Islamic component. The way the Palestinian Authority interprets Islam, the Jews are cursed of Allah, the enemies of Allah, and Allah wants them killed. There is a hadith that's part of Islamic tradition that talks about the end of time, the hour of resurrection won't come until Muslims fight the Jews and kill them. 2 weeks after October 7th, when it came time for the Friday sermons, and the Palestinian Authority Ministry of Religion published its weekly talking points for the sermons that all the mosques in the Palestinian Authority are supposed to preach. What did they include? they included that Islamic source, that the resurrection, the end of time won't come until Muslims fight the Jews and kill them. And then it continues. Jews are going to hide behind rocks and trees, which are going to call out, Muslim, servant of Allah, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him. Well, what happened 2 weeks before? The Jews who were at that party out in nature were hiding behind rocks and trees, and Muslims came and killed them. The Palestinian Authority was telling its people that the massacre of 250 young people at that party, at that musical festival, that massacre was part of Islam. It wasn't just Palestinian nationalism. It was fulfillment of Islam.
Tell us the truth. Okay, so this is a battle for truth that we're talking about. We want to push back misinformation, push back lies. So tell us the truth about what Islam teaches, what this religion teaches about Israel and the Jewish people.
Yes, the Quran is full of verses, especially chapter 9, Surah 9, verse 5, verse 29, the so-called sword verses. Actually, the Quran is asking the followers of Islam to find the people of the book, that means Jews and Christians, and force them to convert to Islam. If they don't, they should be fight and or killed. It says that you go and kill them wherever you find them. And in verse 29, it says that you should force them to turn to Islam. And there are 3 different options that you can give to the people of the book, neither to become a Muslim, or they could pay jizya, which is a tax, to practice so-called false religion, or to be killed. So there is no acceptance of the other faith than Islam. Islam is very clear. All the world will have to submit under Islam.
So yeah, if someone's lying, and I don't think it's Israel. I think that's kind of where I'm at on that. And I do believe that Israel has done literally almost everything possible to carry out this conflict in a moral way, a way that follows international law. And I'm with you on that. Now, you talked about Netanyahu and him bringing up Haman and the book of Esther. Is there any direct connection between Haman and Amalek in the Old Testament that you know of?
Yes, it's right there in Esther chapter 3 when Haman is first introduced. It says that he is an Agagite. If you look back to 1 Samuel, when Saul had the opportunity to wipe out Amalek completely, he almost did it, but he let the king go. The king's name was Agag, and so he was let go. And Samuel really excoriated him for disobeying, for not doing the full job of finishing out the Amalekites when he had the chance. So Agag was left and had sons and daughters, and Haman rose up to power in the book of Esther, and he was an Agagite. So Haman is now a name that is honored in certain quarters. And this name, Haman, has carried forward in time and is absolutely present today within the nation state that we refer to as Iran. If you don't mind, I'll just jump to this punchline here. It's present today in Iran. Everyone's heard of the Ayatollah Khomeini. Everybody. So his name, the Ayatollah, is his title, and his last name is Khomeini, which is spelled Khamenei. In other words, he's got Haman right in his name. And boy, does that individual hate Israel and wants to destroy it.
Yeah.
So he's taken on that name of Haman, and so that is what Netanyahu was referring to when he says Haman. Haman is still we have to fight against Amalek. We have to fight against Haman. It's still present within the regime that controls Iran. We're not at war against the Iranian people. We're not at war against the Gazan people. We're at war at Hamas, and we're at war with the Iranian regime that is supplying resources to Hamas that allow Hamas to do the bidding of Iran without having to spend the direct energy to do it themselves.
Yeah. Now, Hamas, Haman, Hamas. They're fairly close in English, at least. Talk to me about the meaning of the word Hamas in Hebrew, for example.
Yeah, it's so funny how similar the languages are. Arabic and Hebrew have some crossovers, and the word Hamas. If you look it up on Wikipedia, the first thing it'll tell you is that it's an acronym. But it's more than that. It's a word. It's an Arabic word. And the word means zeal, and it means strength. So when Hamas takes on this, acronym, and they enjoy being referred to in Arabic as Hamas because it's, it means that. It's a positive term. But in the Bible, and the word Hamas, I don't think it appears. It doesn't appear like it doesn't appear exactly, in this context of zeal, strength. Instead, it's the other side of the coin. It's the dark side, because zeal and strength that is perpetrated for evil purposes. We have another word for that in English. We call that violence. We call it violence or terrorism. And the first use of the word Hamas in the Bible in Hebrew is for the word violence. It's Genesis chapter 6, verse 11, and then in verse 13, when God is saying the whole earth is turning corrupt. Everyone has turned to Hamas, which is violence. So we translated violence in English twice.
One of the false narratives going on out there right now is that Jewish people are not indigenous to the land of Israel, that they are colonialists who have stolen land from the Palestinian people. So, in your opinion, who would you classify as indigenous to the land of Israel, and why?
Well, there are a few ways to answer the question. I think the first one, since this is a podcast for people of faith, indigeneity is important. To talk about who was there first or who's been there the longest. But the bedrock of the claim of the Jewish people to the land of Israel is not in a contest of, well, we were here 4,000 years and you were only here this many years or that many years. First and foremost, it's important to say it is God's covenant with Israel, with the Jewish people, that he promised us his land. And from a Jewish perspective, one of the things that we learn out from the very first verse in the entire Bible, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Bible commentators, one in particular, his name is Rashi. It's an acronym, but he asks a question. He says, if the Bible is essentially a book of commandments, so why doesn't God start already in Exodus once we really get into the flow of all the commandments? Why do we need the whole story of Genesis and the creation story and the patriarchs and the matriarchs and the tribes? Like, it's nice, it's good stories, but there are no commandments there. So what do we really need them for? And what this commentator said 1,000 years ago, he said, the day is going to come when the nations of the world are going to say to you, to Israel, you are thieves. You stole this land from us. You need to leave. Now, 1,000 years ago, when the Jewish people are scattered throughout the world and very few are living in the land of Israel, this commentary sounded ridiculous. And yet today, even a small child would understand the teaching here, and you don't even need this person to teach it, because we see it every single day that the people of the world are questioning our right to this land. So first and foremost, why do we have it? Because as this commentator said, God created the world, and he gave the land of Israel to the Jewish people. And that by itself, certainly for people of faith, should be enough. But to answer now your question more specifically, when you dig in the land of Israel in general, in Jerusalem in particular, you find antiquities dating back thousands and thousands of years. And what you find are many of those antiquities, you find ancient inscriptions affirming biblical events. You find seals with the names of biblical figures like the biblical King Hezekiah, like the prophet Isaiah, inscriptions affirming events such as Hezekiah's engineering a 533-meter long tunnel to save Jerusalem from the Assyrian invasion 2,700 years ago. We find coins with Hebrew writing going back thousands of years, such as on the silver half-shekel coin that would have been brought to the temple as part of the temple tax. We are now unearthing discoveries like the Pool of Siloam, like the pilgrimage road that would have taken pilgrims up to the temple thousands of years ago, which we can go more into depth about all those discoveries. But the amazing thing is we are finding literally the stones are crying out that we have been here for thousands of years. And the amazing thing is, and I shared this idea before, which is, if you take a seal, like the seal of King Hezekiah that was found only a few years ago. Now, I ask many people, what do you think these seals that we're discovering are made out of? And instinctively, people say wax. And I said, well, it's a good thing they weren't made out of wax, because had they been made out of wax when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem 2,500 years ago and burned it down to the ground, these seals would have melted. Mm-hmm. They're made out of clay. Clay hardens in fire. But had the seals been found, say, 2,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, even 500 years ago, we almost certainly would not know about it today. It's as if these discoveries are laying in wait for a time such as this. Why? Because up until about 100 years ago, much of the world, certainly the Western world, you could say were believers. They believed in God. They believed in the truth of the Bible, of Scripture. And yet over the last century, certainly in Europe, certainly in the United States now, we're seeing more and more of a drift away from that, where there is virtually no university campus anywhere in the Western world without a robust biblical criticism, if not class, a whole department. And certainly in the culture, in the media, academia, the Bible and those who take the Bible seriously are mocked and scorned. And yet, at the same time, we're living at a time of unprecedented archaeological discovery of antiquities, fancy word for old stuff, that are showing that Jerusalem's biblical heritage, the connection that Jews and Christians share with that heritage, is not simply a matter of faith, but a matter of fact. It's real. You could see it, you could touch it, you could walk on it. And so here you have a choice. You have those who are denying, and at the same time, you have unprecedented discovery showing the truth of Jerusalem's biblical heritage.
I want to talk to you about this modern Zionism, really, which is, I believe, rooted in the biblical idea, whether it becomes, political in modern times or not. It's rooted in the Hebrew Bible. But we get this sort of criticism all the time that, these modern Jews, they're not really Jews. How do you respond to that? Are they connected to the ancient people of Israel? How can we know for sure? I think it's important for people to hear this because of the misinformation that gets spouted out there.
Well, usually my initial response is to burst out laughing at that suggestion, because I'm not aware of any other people that faces such doubts or questions. I don't hear anyone saying, how do we know that the English today are truly descendants of the Anglo-Saxons and the Normans? How do we know that the Irish are truly descendants of the Irish? In effect, it is an attempt to delegitimize Israel and the Jewish people. It is, whether intended that way or not, it is a form of anti-Semitism to doubt the veracity of our identity and our claim. The fact is that we have traditions going back generation upon generation, which demonstrate clearly that we are who we say we are. And there has been a continuous Jewish presence in the land of Israel for thousands of years, even after the Jewish people were cast out by the Romans. Not all of them were cast out. Some did manage to remain, and their descendants are still living there today. We practice the same faith, we speak the same language, and we serve the same God that we have been doing for 3,000 plus years. So to question the truth of that is simply a sign of ignorance on the part of those who raise the doubts.
Well, I completely agree, and I'm really glad to hear you clarify it that way for people that are listening. Tell me this, those nations right now that are not standing with Israel, what are the consequences that they're risking in these moments?
In Genesis 13, God's promise to Abraham is, I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. Yeah. And through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. We have that blessing promised through Abraham, through Yeshua. We have all those blessings, but the curse is still in effect for those who curse the nation of Israel, for those who turn against her. God's hand of judgment can come against you. You are not in a good place if you come against the nation of Israel. And how many times have we seen that playing out in the past, from the rebirth of the nation state of Israel, the very next day, an alliance of Arab nations come against her, try to destroy her and wipe her off the face of the earth. And God supernaturally intervenes with his nation that has no modern weaponry. They were just farmers. They just came out of the Holocaust, and they overcame all these enemy combatants that surrounded her. And over again, every war, every conflict where Satan tries to push his hand against the people of Israel, then the conclusion is Israel gets more of their God-given land back, more of their territory back that's promised to Abraham. And they don't even have a fraction of what's promised. In Joshua 1:4, we're talking about from the Mediterranean Sea to the river Euphrates. That's all the way into Iraq. And, that whole territory is meant to be the homeland of Israel. But they just have a small fraction. And the disputed territories of West Bank is Judea and Samaria. They're not going to last, because there are specific prophecies in the Bible against the Edomites, against Ammon and Moab, against the Hagarites, against Egypt, against Byblos to the north, against Tyre and Sidon, against Damascus, that will be fulfilled. They will be wiped out if they continue to stare God in the face and defy him and say, we're going to take your land. Joel chapter 3 warns, part of the judgment of sheep and goats, to those who stand on the wrong side of history, who try to divide God's land, who try to take it, who try to take God's people captive, sell them as slaves, or persecute and kill them. There is a special judgment, and God will punish them. There will be punishment on the great day and even before that. So it's not a good place.
But there's good news if you're not a Hagarite, and that is there's still time to repent.
Yes.
People forget. If we truly are in a nation here in America, for instance, of by the people, for the people, you're a person, guess what? You have an opportunity to still make a difference. Again, the problem with today is we pawn off that responsibility on somebody else. I'm not an adult. I don't have to witness to people. That's Billy Graham's job. I hate to warn you this, but Billy Graham has been dead for a long time. It is now other people's job to do the right thing. And it's everybody's responsibility to stand up and do the right thing. Begin to pray for your nation. Pray that they'll repent. Pray that they'll change their ways. If you have an ability to be involved in politics, do so. When a vote comes up, vote. Stop thinking that it's just hopeless and pointing the finger and laughing at everybody or condemning them. Do the right thing and make a difference so that your nation has that opportunity to not be not included in the end times and everybody else is just magically gone.
Yeah. No, that's good. So here in Canada, very, very embarrassed at Canada's response to what's been happening.
It's okay.
Like at least in America, they're saying that they stand with Israel. Here they're not even saying
Canada's
that.
not even trying.
Canada, it's like why even try? But we do hope that politically things will change. The climate will change in the next year or two. But we, like you, want people to have a voice, to hear what you're saying, to say, you know what, we are not. We're not inconsequential. Every individual has a voice, can take a stand, can speak their mind, and we really believe that people, Christians especially, need to do that. And not just politically where Israel is concerned, not politically at all, but where Israel is concerned, to say, hey, there's a nation of destiny here that we need to be supporting and aligned with and blessing.
Thanks for watching. You can listen to this entire podcast on your favorite audio podcast platform. Find the link below. And while you're at it, don't forget to click subscribe and follow us on Facebook so you can stay connected to First Century Foundations.